Man, thanks so much. Okay, taken as a whole, our last two lessons contrasted the passive stand still and watch the Lord do great things kind of faith, like at the Red Sea, verses 28-29, and the very participatory and adventuresome faith of a person like Rahab, a faith noted by the New Testament writers as one very much demonstrating the times we need to have works to go along with our faith. And had she been passive, as was the case at the no way out, porous Red Sea situation, she'd have clearly died with the rest of the Jerichoite friends that day when the walls came down. Rahab, rather, is if not the preeminent example in the Bible of the at times necessity of having works with our faith if we're to be so delivered. Some deliverances, like the Red Sea and eternal salvation, just require faith and no works whatsoever. In fact, there are many verses that make it clear that if we muddy the issue by trying to bring our works into issues like these, we totally ruin it, like Romans 4:5. Now, to him who does not work, and I would encourage you to memorize this verse. Take time to write it down and memorize it this week. To him who does not work, like this is absolute, don't do this, but believes on him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness. Sometimes I'll say it's almost like Paul's laying down a gauntlet of defining our saving faith, as if we have to understand there can be no works at all if we're understanding it's by faith alone. Okay? So he's kind of narrowing it down for us to help us see saving faith. Yes?
I don't need this answer right now, but the people who are post-loading works,
Or post what?
post-loading works.
Okay.
At some point, can we have a discussion on that scripture?
Yeah, putting works on the back end.
Where they say they'll know you're a believer by your fruits.
Okay.
And they'll claim fruits are not works.
They're not works. They're words.
They're words.
Okay.
I mean, they're words. So that's how you know a believer or not is by their words. I mean, if they're a believer or not, you've got to let me know.
You said? Okay.
It's how to tell false prophets. It's not how to tell a believer. That's the context in Matthew 7:15. There, you'll know them, the false prophets, by their fruit. In Matthew 12, the next time he uses the exact same imagery, make the tree good and its fruit good, or the tree bad and its fruit bad, for by their fruit you shall know them. Mm-hmm. There in Matthew 12, he says, for out of the abundance of a man's heart his mouth speaks, and that we're justified by our words or not. And so fruit equals words in Matthew and Jesus' metaphor. Okay. So how can you tell a false prophet? Well, you can't tell by their works because they have sheep's clothing. Outwardly, they look like they're Christians, but inwardly, they're ravenous wolves. The only way you can tell a false teacher or false prophet is how? By what they teach. Yeah, by what they teach. And if their message is true, they're a true prophet. If it's not, they're a false prophet. That's the only way.
I'm sorry, I didn't cut you off. So.
But is that the only thing we were wanting to hit on right there?
Yeah, because I hear it quite a bit from people who are, I call it post-loading. They say you'll know that they don't show fruit, they're not a believer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Hey, can I?
Yeah, please.
Can I use justification there with righteousness? Justified?
Why not?
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
We got it in Romans 4.
Yeah, I mean, Paul said he got his gospel straight from Jesus, and it's about justification. Jesus talked about justification, and Luke 18 is a perfect example with the publican and the Pharisee, where Jesus uses the word justified and says, truly I say, this man went to his house justified, because he understood about the propitiatory sacrifice.
You know why I asked that?
Go ahead if you want. Okay. Okay, so back to Romans 4:5. Where to believe on him who justifies implies understanding our works can have no place in it. Paul also elaborating there in that passage that our works can have no place because then it would not be by grace. You remember the passage? It'd be something earned or merited or deserved rather than being free and granted to us freely by the grace of Christ, substitutionary propitiatory death he's just been speaking about leading up to this. So, of course, there are many other verses like 1 Corinthians 1, why God shows in the message of the cross that no flesh should glory in his presence. 2 Corinthians 5:19, the ministry of reconciliation, that God was in Christ, not imputing their sins against them, etc. Galatians 2, we maintain that man's justified by faith apart from works of the law, etc., etc. There's some verses there, and there's more. Basically, that we're not to get our fingerprints, all these verses, we're not to get our fingerprints in on Christ's finished work on the cross on our behalf and in our stead, because He's going to get all the glory for that, and we dare not steal it. But also, we're fundamentally not understanding the simplicity and truth of the gospel that we get eternal life and justification, sanctification, reconciliation, redemption, forgiveness of sins, and so forth by just believing in not one thing more. To even think I need to have works or repenting or certain attitudes to add to Christ's finished work means I don't understand the gospel promise to be believing it. But that's not to say there aren't a myriad of deliverances that the Lord gives because of our works. Like even the overall deliverance to live the victorious life here and now, which definitely requires works and obedience and even repenting at times to go along with our faith. And certainly the work of calling on the Lord for His help. All the medical in chapter 11 had active faith that included obedience and works, and none more famously than Rahab. So today, let's get to today's lesson. We're going to begin a two-part series. Now there's going to be more lessons, I hope, than just 2 parts. But the series is essentially 2 parts. Namely, that we can be victors and winners in our successes, but by faith, we can also be winners and victors even in our failures and sufferings and what seem like defeats. So part 1, winners in victory. There was a sweet lady at our church who was an excellent cook, not to mention a super dynamic Christian. Her name was Davis Nutt. She was married to Dwayne Nutt, who was more famous than her, most beloved guy in all of Corsicana, starting quarterback at SMU back in the early 50s before Don Meredith. On his team were Forrest Gregg, Don McElhaney, Dwayne's soccer partner Raymond Berry, and many other greats that went into the NFL. Dwayne was an elder at our church, by far the most loved guy in Corsicana. Davis was a celebrity in her own right. She was a live wire and kind of a comedian and would be asked to speak at various things around town because she was so entertaining. And she was also on the Oprah Winfrey Show for her award-winning buttermilk or peanut butter pie. I can't remember which one it was. But during the weekdays, she helped her nephew at this really neat coffee shop downtown next to the theater, the Palace. And so it was called 2 Doors Down because it's 2 doors down from the Palace. Okay. And they had sandwich bagels and all that kind of stuff and her famous pies. And she was the cook there, if you will. The week that I preached this sermon, 2 Doors Down had just sold and they were having a celebration and giving out raffle tickets. A lady in the crowd started screaming, "I want a mobile home, I want a mobile home." David said, "That can't be. We didn't offer any such thing." And she had this Aunt Jemima type wrap on her head that she always wore when she's cooking. And she says, "Here, let me look at that ticket." And the ticket said, "Win a bagel." That's what it said. This is true. But that's just like life. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Sometimes you think you won, but you lost. And occasionally you think you lost, but you won. But as we only touched on last time, wouldn't it be neat to be a winner under each and every circumstance that you're in, winning and losing? We're going to see people in Hebrews 11 these next 2 weeks who lived by faith and were winners in any and every situation. When they won, they won, and when they lost, they actually won. And Paul's words in Romans 8 fit perfectly here. And all these things were overwhelmingly conquerors through Him who loved us, which comes right after the verse that says, whether it's in tribulation or distress, persecution, famine, or sword, or nakedness, apparel, whatever, we're whether killed all day long or accounted as sheep for the slaughter, in all these things even, we are overwhelmingly conquerors. It's the word hupernakomen, Nike, Victor. We are super overcomers through Him who loved us. Baseball resembles life. You might have heard that before. Defeats and failures are a built-in part of the game. In the NFL, only one team's had a perfect season. Who was it? Dolphins, yeah. Dolphins, 1972. Patriots missed out in the Super Bowl. They got beat in the Super Bowl.
Regular season, they were undefeated, but they lost, yeah.
Didn't Eli Manning beat them that year?
Yeah.
And there's been more than a few college teams who've had perfect season. Who had the most wins? What coach? Most wins, and how many was it? Bud Wilkinson, 47 straight wins. Okay, but undefeated seasons, that'll never, and it never will happen in Major League Baseball, not with a full season. There hasn't been a 400 hitter in the majors since when?
Ted Williams.
What year? 1941.
Yeah,
But
it's not part of it.
that's very good. And no one's ever been close to a 500 season. In the majors, you are a Hall of Famer if you fail 2/3 of the time. But you also have to have a lot of victories and successes within the game, in particular games, if you're going to win. Becoming a medical is just like that. There will be victories and successes, but apparent failures as well. You might have thought the lady lost when she only won a bagel instead of a Winnebago. But what if that bagel turned out to be made of pure gold? James said, "Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, for once he has been approved, he shall receive" what? The crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. And you and I might see a trial as a bunch of crud, but the Lord sees it as potential for you getting a big old crown. Now you might ask, what distinguishes a medicoi from other believers? A good answer would be, a believer gets life by faith. A medicoi lives by faith. Now when you get eternal life by faith, you're destined for the kingdom. When you live by faith, you're destined to be a king. Did you hear that? So let's find out more about what it means in this great chapter to live by faith and become a king in Christ's kingdom, verse 32. And what more shall we say, for time will fail us to talk about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets. He's taken us through the whole Old Testament, have you noticed? To illustrate these medicoi who lived by faith. He began on the first pages of Genesis, literally, Cain and so forth, and Noah. He continued meticulously through that book in order, on into Exodus, and Moses and the Passover and so forth, and then now to Joshua, and last week, and now to Judges and 1 Samuel, and on the precipice of the prophets. In Hebrews 11, there are two big issues for living by faith: the triumphs that faith procures and the testings that faith endures. Verses 32 through first part of 35 are about the triumphs faith procures. 35 through 40, the testings that faith endures. So let's look at these triumphs today, verse 32. What more shall I say? In other words, I could go on and on about these and the other, because there's a lot in Judges he certainly could have mentioned and he doesn't. For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. The first group are mighty men of war. They're the prize fighters. The second group, mighty men of the word. They're the prophets. But both groups carry their own danger. In fact, the prophets were more often killed than the professional soldiers. But for now, he's talking about their victories. Verse 32. Who through faith, and here instead of by faith, like he's been saying, he says dia piste, through faith. But dia is also translated by faith in some places, or by something. So it's a synonymous phrase. Who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Before looking at their victories, let's look at the victors. Verse 32, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel. The first four come out of the book of Judges. The next two out of the portion known as kings. Now, if David and Samuel, come out of 1 Samuel, why am I saying the portion known as kings? Anybody? Because in the Hebrew text and in the Septuagint, it's not 1 and 2 Samuel. 1 and 2 Samuel are 1 and 2 Kings. And then 1 and 2 Kings in our book are what? 3rd and 4th Kings. Okay? So how appropriate too, since in the kingdom the medicoi will be both judges and kings. Time will fail us, he says, and it'll fail us too to look in depth at each one. I once read a whole book just on Samson. So first, let's look at the things they have in common. First, each of the first four were reluctant. Gideon said, if the Lord is really with us, why has all this happened? Where are the miracles that our father told us about? And that's been true of all of us at some point. Many have entered the Christian life with such excitement, thinking every minute is going to be like Daniel or the book of Acts, especially when I was in high school during the Jesus movement. We'd go to Young Life camps and a lot of our peers would stand up. They weren't Christians or churchgoers, but they'd stand up saying they accepted Christ that week. And I know they were so excited and, at the beginning of it, because it was so fun and exhilarating in those days. But they think like in Acts, houses shaking, tongues of fire, miracles every moment. And when that doesn't happen, we become more reluctant and hesitant to live by faith. And these Hebrew believers he's writing had to be wondering also, if this stuff is true, why isn't he helping us more, like Gideon asked? Why isn't he delivering us from the sword and peril and persecution, like with Daniel, David, Moses, and the rest? In fact, why hasn't he come back yet, like he promised? Talk about reluctance, listen to Gideon. The Lord tells him to deliver Israel from the Midianites, and he asks, how can I deliver Israel? My clan is the weakest of Manasseh, and I'm the weakest of the clan. He's not saying he's the weakest of the tribe. He's the weakest of the little clan within the tribe. Do you ever feel that way? I sure have. A fellow went to a psychiatrist. After hours of listening, the psychiatrist finally gave his diagnosis. You suffer from low self-esteem, he says, but don't worry, that's very common among losers. Now, I played in a Young Life golf tournament this Tuesday, and beforehand, when the area director introduced himself and was sending us off to play golf, he says, everybody go out there and have a great time, because today, everybody's a winner, unless you come in last. Now, maybe the Lord's tapped you on the shoulder to do something for him, like Gideon or these other guys, and like them, you've given every excuse under the sun. I can't do that. I don't have time. I don't have the resources. That's not my gift. But at the core of it, we're like Gideon, saying, in effect, I'm too weak for that. The Lord tells him the same message he tells us in chapter 13, the same message he told Moses, Joshua, and the rest of these guys. What is it? I will be with you. But Gideon doubts that too. He's reluctant with a capital R. Just like these Hebrews were reluctant and beginning to doubt that our writer is writing, and just like we are so often when it comes to serving the Lord, whether it's starting a small group or a Bible study or a ministry here at church or volunteering wherever you might volunteer, we're often reluctant. Barak was reluctant. He's called to deliver Israel from Sisera. Deborah says to him, the Lord will deliver him into your hands. But Barak says what? I won't go unless you go with me. Now, these fellows weren't just reluctant. They've got reservations whether the Lord was really with them or would be with them. The Hebrews writer says to us just what Deborah said to Barak, and just what the Lord told Moses, and just what he told Joshua and Gideon. Hebrews 13, 5, 6. You've got to memorize this verse, please. And I told you it's the one I quote more often than any verse in the Bible. He himself has said, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you, so that we may confidently say, the Lord is my helper, I'll not be afraid. What can man do to me? Being a medicoy doesn't mean you're not going to have doubts, but we'll never become a medicoy and never have all the victories the Lord wants for us if the promise that he's with us isn't a bedrock belief in your belief system, in your walk by faith. It's got to be bedrock. We've got to believe that the Lord is with us, helping us, to have the boldness and courage to do the medicoy exploits that he calls us to do. On top of that, the Lord's going to keep putting us in situations to test our belief that he really is with us. Like it says in verse 36 of all the medicoy. Still others, receiving as a test. And those Greek words there mean test, receiving, okay? Receiving as a test. Mockings and scourgings, yes, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned and sawn in two, and you can read all the rest. In other words, you Hebrew believers and you at Coppell Bible on Sunday mornings, you're going to have trials that you need to take on and receive as tests. And nobody, including our captain, said this medicoy path of being led through our sufferings was going to be easy. Recall what these old guys did before and what they took on as test. Pretty strong stuff. And believe me, in his attempt to forge and refine and purify our medicoy faith, he's going to keep leading you and me through the fire of some tough challenges and tests. And we need to receive them, as he'll say in the next chapter, as training, all part of the training. Now, at Bud School, becoming a Navy SEAL, we've talked about this before and we will again, Lord willing, in the next chapter, it's all tough. There are certain stages, though, that are extra tough. The first week, they put you through some physical, psychological tests that are so tough, there's a high rate of early voluntary withdrawals from the program. It's kind of a weed out week. The second week is the pool phase, and maybe you've seen this on TV. I have. And they go down, and they're just like continually hopping, or maybe they can pause down for a little bit, and then they come back up. I thought that they had a weight belt on them. That'd make it even worse. I also thought they were blindfolded. That'd make it worse. But you can imagine the panic you're under when you don't, as you're getting tired and getting that, when you know you're going to suck in water at some point. And a lot of them do practically drown. It shows them on the side, like, not doing the defibrillator, but like they're throwing up water and the whole thing. Bad. Pretty strong. But they want to get you to that panic point, and many realize this isn't for them and they bail out. All through the program, there's testing. They're testing you with sleep deprivation from week 1. And enduring extreme pain, cold, uncertainties, and it all adds up. And you're not even to Hell Week yet. That's the 4th week. Only about 25% make it all the way through Hell Week. Only about 25%. The Medicoid training program we'll see in chapter 12 is much the same way. Now, I'm bringing it up here because of saying we've got to look at these challenges and sufferings as what? Tests. They're tests. And learn to take them on gladly, as Peter and James put it, as all part of the course. And something that will give you more hope than anything, and it does for me, for getting through these tests, is that Jesus himself had to get through his test. According to Psalm 22 and the other Messianic Psalms and the servant songs in Isaiah and Hebrews 5, 7 through 9, and the gospel passages that deal with the Passion account, especially in the garden and on the cross, Jesus sounded like Gideon and these other guys. Where are you? He says to the Father, where have you gone? Why are you so far from me and from the words of my groaning and from my agony? To have these feelings isn't sin. What makes you a Medicoi hero is whether you'll act like he's with you and whether you'll trust that he's with you, even when everything else screams that he's not. Has anybody had an experience like that lately where you felt as if he wasn't with you or he felt distant? Or maybe you're praying to feel his presence and you're not getting the good warm vibes that he is with you.
I've got one quick story.
Yeah, come on.
We were on Lake Meredith duck hunting, and I took my wife on a little stroll in the little boat, not the big boat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I can cut across here.
Oh, yeah.
So I cut across, and it blew in from the west.
Uh-huh.
And it was so terrible, I just thought, this is going to be it.
Uh-huh.
And Virginia,
And it's freezing cold water, right?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was the worst part. And Virginia, she didn't understand. And she's holding on to this. Oh, this is better than 6 pounds.
Oh, no.
Man, I mean,
Oh, gosh.
I'm bailing a little bit of water
Yeah.
too, but anyway, I was just praying like crazy. So,
I've heard of people that were pilots in the little plane taking a friend up, and it really is going down. The friend doesn't know it. They're having this great time thinking the pilot's jacking with them. And then the pilot says, shut up. You know, you've probably been in that boat. Okay, no one illustrates this better than the next fellow, the feeling that God's not with you, okay? If anyone would have had good reason to doubt the Lord was with him, it would have been Samson. He dissipated, he's disobedient, he's debauched, and at the end of life, he's getting his just deserts. Eyes poked out, made like a slave, made fun of. But the Lord had never forsaken him. He cries out like Hebrews has been telling us to do, Lord, remember me, be with me, strengthen me. And he was with him, and he did strengthen him. In reality, he never stopped being with him, and by faith, Samson acted on it at the end of his life, and he's a Medicoi. You might think, if a debauched screw-up like Samson can be a Medicoi, there's hope for all of us. Maybe I can be one too, and you're right. But to get in the Medicoi college and the training program we'll be talking about in the weeks ahead, you've got to pass the ACTs. You know what I mean by ACTs? You've got to act, ACT, on your faith and have the acts of faith, calling on the Lord and trusting that he's with you. 3 specific times the Lord told Moses he would be with him. Exodus 3:33, Deuteronomy 31. 6 times he told Joshua that in just one chapter. 4 times with Joseph in just one chapter. Twice with Isaac, twice with Jacob, that he'd be with them. After repeatedly asking for signs of God's presence, the Lord told Gideon emphatically, I will be with you. Twice we're told the Spirit of God had come upon Samson, but the tragedy of Samson's life is he didn't know when the Lord had famously what? Departed from him. But that implies the Lord had always been with him up to that point, even with all of Samson's screw-ups. In context, that departure didn't refer to God's presence leaving Samson. He was always there for Samson, available the moment Samson would repent. But the context makes clear he departed in the sense of what? The context is clear that his power and blessing had been taken away, and boy was it. If you read Samson's story, you might think you're far superior to him in your morality and spirituality, and you are, probably. You might think Samson wasted his life, and he did. No Medicoi are perfect. But early on, one thing Samson did, he trusted and called on the Lord. Here's an occasion. He says, Lord, you just gave me this great victory, and now you're going to let me thirst to death. You remember when he said that? And the Lord miraculously provided. And the Lord wants to give us victories like that too, all along our Medicoi path. They were reluctant, so was Jephthah. Jephthah, Gideon's son by a harlot. What do you remember about him? He was kicked out by his brothers and his inheritance taken away. Why? We'll talk about that. He joined a group of worthless men raiding Ammonite villages, Israel's enemies. When Israel came to recruit him to be their commander against the Ammonites, he said, didn't you hate me before? And now you're in trouble and you want me back? You remember that? Kind of like Donald Trump, so many conservatives dislike him. They'd like him to be out of office, but I guarantee 1 year with the liberal in place, and they would be begging for him to come back. And like Donald Trump, understandably, Jephthah was reluctant. But he became one of Israel's greatest leaders, and get this, he was a great negotiator. Does that sound familiar? Anybody you know? And a fearsome warrior. Now you might be reluctant. Reluctant to live by faith, reluctant to take on Medicoi type tasks, reluctant to do the hard work of disciplined Christian service, or put yourself in situations where you have to call on the Lord. Reluctance won't keep you off the victory train as long as by faith you get on it. And each of these did. Peter was already a believer when the Lord asked him to get out of the boat. You remember that? It's not an evangelistic story about how to get saved, though so many use it that way. It's an illustration of the victories and deliverances that can come from walking by faith. It's when he started doubting that he sunk. I had a friend whose business had struggled for years. Since he's with the Lord now, I can say his name, George Grogan, one of my heroes. He was longtime chairman of our Young Life Committee in East Dallas. He became a Christian in the Pleasant Grove Young Life Club back in 1952. He was a man's man, and all the guys wanted to be like George. He was strong, and he helped so countless many. But there was a time George was eaten up with anxiety and worry about his business. The day finally came when shutting the doors were literally minutes away that day. Before, it had always been his business, his baby, and he had more than a little healthy pride for what he had built. But he was always reluctant to be totally sold out to the Lord. He was busy dabbling in politics and investments and business ventures, that is, when his business was going so well. While things were going well, he was always hesitant to be totally sold out to the Lord and trust Him with his business. But now the situation was desperate, so in his office he gets down on his knees and he tells the Lord, quote, if you want it closed, that's fine. It's yours. I give it up. I give it all to you. And at that moment, an invisible burden was lifted off of his heart. Literally within the hour, a longtime friend, the friend's name was R.V. Martin, not Harvey, but he was not All-American, but he played in the Senior Bowl. He played with Bob Lilly at TCU. He was an early 50s young life guy at Pleasant Grove High School. R.V. Martin came by with a generous investor. Not only did they keep the doors open, but the Lord enabled them, enabled George in particular, to come up with this invention, a product, a best-selling product. They were a paint manufacturing company, but his chemist invented this product called Transseal that you use on cars to protect them from acid rain. So they sold to Jaguar, GM, and all these places, because sometimes you'll see cars on the trucks being new cars, and they might have a covering over them of some kind, but that's not optimum. It can kind of mess up the paint. There's other techniques, but it tends to mess up the paint. This Transseal product, it goes on like a roll of tape, if you will, but big wide roll, and you put it on the car, and then you wash it off without chemical. You can wash it off without chemicals. So it not only kept him alive, but made him, very successful ever since. Now he could have given it all to the Lord, right, that night in his office, and still gone belly up, but that's next week's lesson. On this occasion, the Lord used it as a faith-defining moment for George. It changed George's life, and I can testify to it because I remember when it happened. He was never the same ever after, and the joy and peace and security was so obvious to everyone, and it was true the rest of his life for years and years after that moment, after him seeing the Lord work such a thing and confirm that he was absolutely with him in and through all of this. From then on, you talk about a fellow who lived by faith in everything he did. He realized this is the way to live, not just with your business. And he gave everything to the Lord, not just his business, but himself, his ministry, his helping others. He helped others always like crazy. His family, his health, you name it. Everything. He truly lived by faith as much as anyone I've ever known, and was so quick to reassure others about trusting the Lord and giving it all to him. And he never stopped giving glory to the Lord in everything. I promise you the Lord wants to give you some victories like that as well. Shakespeare said, "Be not afraid of greatness. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and others have it thrust upon them." Each one of these guys we're reading about achieved greatness and great victories by overcoming reluctance by faith. And particularly the faith that knows the Lord is with them to help them. Another common denominator they all shared, the Holy Spirit came upon them. Of all of them, it keeps repeating. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, came upon Jephthah, came upon Samson, came upon David, came upon Samuel. And 3, each gave glory to the Lord for their victories, just like George, who gave his business to the Lord and hardly ever failed each time that I saw him to give the Lord credit for their many successes, whether in his business or his family or his church work, Bible studies, whatever. Every time I was with him, he'd say something to the effect that the Lord is doing X, Y, Z, and it was beautiful. And he saw that the Lord was with and helping him in it all. And he could calm people and soothe their nerves so well because of what he'd been through. I might be in his office sometime talking about some anxiety I was having in Young Life ministry of some kind, concern for our golf tournament or banquet or whatever it was. And he would always say, "Now, Stephen," and that's, like your parent talking to you. He was like a second dad to me. He'd say, "Now, Stephen, it all belongs to the Lord." And he's going to take care of it. And he always did. All these fellows whom the Spirit of God came upon at various times for victory, they were all so quick to give the Lord the glory and even spell out what he had done. And there are more common denominators that we don't have time to discuss, but let's look at their uniquenesses now for a second, because that's where we might get the most encouragement for achieving our victories through faith. Here's a few. The Lord told Gideon, "You've got too many people for me to give the Midianites in your hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, 'My own hand saved me,'" because God wants to get the glory. He reduced Gideon's army to a shell of itself, and ever thereafter, Gideon is a symbol of strength and weakness, being made strong in weakness. That's God's modus operandi for every medicoi. My friend George was a super strong guy physically. Man, he was a man's man. Really strong, super strong hands. He's amazing. But it was in being made so aware of his weaknesses that moved him to make the Lord his business partner, and he was never the rather proud man that he had been once before. Proud because he was so strong, right? And now being aware of his weaknesses, it made him humble and just the neatest guy. George knew his weaknesses and as a result saw the Lord's power over and over and over again. Barak, more than anything, illustrates how medicoi or team players. He told Deborah, "I'll only go if you go with me." Deborah warned him, that means you're not going to get all the glory. But being the consummate team player, Barak was fine with that, because medicoi team players, they don't care who gets the glory. Barak also illustrates the medicoi volunteer spirit. Deborah and Barak enlisted many to their age. Remember Jael? What did Jael do? Jael, guy or girl? Anybody? Girl. What did she do? Put the tent peg through Sisera's temple. Snuck in to his tent, like under the guise of bringing him some warm milk. I think that put him to sleep. Wham! All those women, they had to put the tents up, right? That's the day when the men had the women. But she knew how to hammer that peg, man. Right through his temple. What a hero she is. After the victory, Barak co-wrote the best-selling hit song with Deborah, dedicated to the volunteer spirit of the medicoi, Judges 5. When leaders lead in Israel, when the people volunteer themselves, and Medicare are nothing if not servant leaders. In the Messianic Psalm, Psalm 110, for $1, who can quote anything without looking at my paper from Psalm 110, famous Messianic Psalm? He quotes it 3 or 4 times in Hebrews. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. That should get a quarter anyway. Till I make your, you know what the next verse says? Verse 3. Your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power. Think of when he gets crowned and in the kingdom, your people, he's talking about the Medikoi, will be volunteers in the day of your power. Nedabah, it's a word that means motivated freely of their own accord, doing what one does voluntarily. That's the Medikoi. More about that in a second. Barak goes on, and Deborah. I wonder if they sang it as a duet. I guess they did. Bless the Lord, bless the Lord. My heart is with the rulers of Israel, the volunteer leaders, the Medikoi in the kingdom in particular, who willingly volunteered with the people. Underline that. Bless the Lord, bless the Lord. Every Medikoi is a volunteer, and every victorious believer is a volunteer. And note how Deborah and Barak word it in verse 9. The rulers of Israel are those who, past tense, volunteered with the people. The same is true of the future Medikoi. It'll be those who volunteered with the people. That is, one, they're not just volunteers serving Christ in the kingdom, the future kingdom. You know, they'll be volunteers in the day of his power. They earned that privilege by voluntarily serving now. And they were volunteers. And that's in perfect keeping with Jesus' promise. Whoever wants to be great in the kingdom, let him be servant of all. And two, that they served with the people. Brings out the fact that victorious believers, namely the Medikoi, are not Lone Ranger believers. They're involved in church and encouraging when they come to church, and according to chapter 10. They don't have their sanctimonious nose in the air, but work right alongside the people. Like Jesus telling the disciples, I am among you. I'm like one of you. I'm among you as one who serves. Or Paul telling the Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, unlike the false teachers, those who claim to be, but maybe he's just facetiously calling them super apostles, we don't lord it over your faith. That's what the false teachers do. If anyone could exercise lordship over people's faith, it would have been a true apostle, and Paul was one of those. But rather, he encourages them that he's right in there with them and one of them, not above them like the false teachers promote themselves. He says basically to them, you don't need me or these false teachers who lord it over you. By your own faith you stand. We're merely fellow workers along with you. We're one of you and merely co-workers with you. Is that cool? Like if Paul were in here, he'd just be sitting with one of us. I loved it at the old church I went to. It was originally called Park Cities Fellowship Bible Church, but it was new and different. In fact, at the end of the sermon, they'd have discussion. It was a big crowd, 300 people or so in their public, and they'd still have discussion. Or actually, we'd break for coffee, and they'd have coffee, cake, and whatever, and then we'd come back in and discuss the sermon. It was cool. That was the fellowship Bible part of it. But what was different to me, having grown up Baptist, no offense to them, because, man, I had great Baptist preachers growing up, but they would sit up on you call it the rostrum? They'd sit up in front of the choir, but they'd sit, sometimes like Dr. Criswell, who I love him, but his chair looked like a throne. It was a big, tall one. But even the preachers at my church out in East Dallas, they sat up on the stage, big, tall stage, and they sat in the pew facing everybody like they're kind of removed and a little different. They're clergy, okay? We're just laity down here. And what I loved about this church, because it's the first time I'd seen it, Bill Counts, he just sat out there with us. And then when it came time to get up, he just gets up and it's like he's one of us. And that's what Paul was like. False teachers aren't like that. So expressive of the humble team spirit Barak and Deborah especially convey. Now we just had at our church what was it, Robert? Because Robert was there. Our leader appreciation dinner. What was that?
Thursday.
Thursday. Okay, and it could be called Volunteer Appreciation Dinner because that's really what it is. All the volunteers at our church, I mean, if you're just in one ministry here, whatever it might be, a greeter, whatever, you come to, and we have it every year, and it's a knockout deal. Usually they have a great band, great food, and they give away a ton of drawing prizes. So you want to volunteer at our church because it actually pays money somehow or other. It's crazy. Okay. But I love it that we value our volunteers because the church is only as great as its volunteers. I know I'm preaching to the choir. But the other end of it is churches usually are generally poor and fail because of their lack of good volunteers. And since a church, I'm sure there's other reasons, but that's a big reason. And since a church is like a body, Paul says, the body is only going to have its maximum function and maximum health when each of its parts, using their gifts, play their proper role and functions. If you haven't ever done starting point, don't put it off. Starting point? Was it great? And you have a spiritual gift inventory, you do the Myers-Briggs, and from what I understand, your Myers-Briggs stuff can change month to month or year to year. So it's kind of neat to do an update on. Am I right, Robert? That's a fact.
It's not reliable and valid, but it typically, there's a certain pattern to it.
When I took it to come on staff here, I came out as Marcy, and that's absolutely, I'm the extreme opposite of her. So I know that how you answer questions can.
Oh, yeah, I can twist the whole thing if I wanted to.
Exactly. Crazy. So anyway, we would suggest that getting involved in it, and that will help you know how you can best use your gifts, whether it's in this church or wherever, and it'd be wonderful. And it's fun. I guarantee you'll have fun doing it. Our church needs you. Any church needs you. But here's what I want you to hear. Are you listening? The Lord needs you. And you might think, Steve, that doesn't sound quite right because the Lord doesn't really need us. No, He does. You heard me right. The Lord needs you. And that's not just I who said it, but the Lord through Deborah and Barak. Because listen to how the song continues. Cursed be those, cursed bitterly because they did not come, not to Israel's help, to the Lord's help. Wow. And so many of the great spiritual and physical victories of life, the Lord's not going to grant victory without help. There are some victories where we do nothing but watch and the Lord does it all, like the Red Sea or eternal salvation we've been talking about these last 2 weeks. But for many, even most deliverances, the Lord uses our help, like with Rahab last week and Barak and Deborah here. And if He's going to make you ultimately victorious in a Medicoy, He needs your cooperation. He needs your volunteer service. And this verse right here, He needs your help, my help, in various works and tasks. Now, I'm not saying He could curse you for not giving it, but these people were cursed for not giving it. I'm sure it depends on the urgency of the matter, like in this case, Israel's deliverance. I don't think the Lord goes around cursing His children for any and every old little issue. I'm sure He doesn't. Another thing unique, more than anyone, Samson illustrates what? That it's never too late to become a Medicoy. Nor could you have ever messed up too much to become a Medicoy. The issue is, will you get on board for the time you have left? Look at this. I love this girl. She looked like my high school girlfriend, a little bit older than she was. Anyway, Laura Hillenbrand. Have anybody seen the movie Seabiscuit? One of my favorite movies. And if you want to see some good YouTube stuff, you go home today and YouTube Seabiscuit. And the real races, it'll be in black and white. Seabiscuit was a smaller horse, and he goes against Man of War and beats him in a one-on-one match and some other stuff. Seabiscuit was amazing. But Hillenbrand had another excellent biography, and I read this book, and it's called Unbroken. Does anybody know, what this guy's name is for $1? I see blank looks, so I'll give $1 for this one. Louis Zamperini, youngest guy ever at the time, 1936 Olympics, to run a distance race for America. Okay, he came in 8th in the 5,000, but he set the record up to that point for the fastest last lap. So maybe he could have done. And then he was a pilot in the Pacific in World War II. Do you know who his roommate was in the Olympics, 1936, Berlin? Hitler was there and all those people. Who was the famous guy, most famous guy in the 1936 Olympics? Jesse Owens. That was his roommate. In World War II, the plane that he piloted was shot down over the Pacific. He spent 42 days on a raft and then 2 years in a Japanese POW camp under the most brutal situation you can imagine. He lost 100 pounds down to 65 pounds. He came back to the States, got married, but had severe PTSD, as you can imagine. He'd wake up every single night with nightmares. He tried to medicate with alcohol, became an alcoholic, and his wife filed for divorce. But she went to a Billy Graham crusade. She walked the aisle. She came home and told Lewis she had committed her life to Christ and therefore wasn't going to divorce him. He thought, well, whatever the case is, it's fine with me because I'm glad she doesn't want to get a divorce, and kind of blew it off. But then he goes to a crusade, commits his life to Christ. I'm sure it was the 49 LA Crusades. That's probably what it was, real famous. And immediately he gave up drinking, and the PTSD and nightmares suddenly stopped. And he's got a great testimony. We've got a video. It's not the best quality. I saw this in real time, and it was so excellent. That's Catherine Zeta-Jones over there. He's 95 at this point.
I thought this was really something. I know you eventually forgave all your captives. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, the result of, they didn't know what it was, but it was post-traumatic stress.
Right.
I had it for the last year under the bird in prison, and if they wouldn't come and home,
The commandant was the bird.
I started drinking heavily, and I met the girl of my dreams, got married, and every night without fail, I'm strangling the bird in my dreams. And one night I woke up and I had my wife in my crib, and it scared me to death. And so she decided to get a divorce, filed for it, and then Billy Graham came to town, and a young couple took her down to her village, and she made a commitment to Christ. And then she came back and said, I'm not going to get a divorce because of my conversion. Well, that was good news to me. And she got me down there, and I got under terrible conviction, got up and rushed home mad. But then again, she reminded me she's not going to get a divorce because of her conversion. So I went back again, and he said something like, when people come to the end of the road, there's nowhere else to turn, they turn to God. Well, that's what happened on the raft in Jersey Town. And I thought, what an idiot. All the promises I made to God, that I would seek him and serve him after the war, I didn't do it. He kept his promise, I didn't keep mine. And so I went back to the prayer room and made a commitment of my life to Christ. And I feel on my knees. I knew everything changed when I was on my knees. I knew I was through getting drunk. I knew I forgave all of my guards, and I knew I forgave the bird. And that, now, I had post-traumatic stress nightmares every single night for the last year of prison camp up to my marriage. And after I made my commitment to serve the Lord, I haven't had that nightmare since.
Well, God bless you.
It's an American girl. Thank you, my friend. It's an honor to know you. Be right back with Brett Marcus.
Good. Okay. Now, I hope you don't get hung up on, I made a commitment to Christ, because I'm assuming he was a believer and then he makes a commitment. We're talking about the deliverances that we have that aren't salvation, but that do require works. Eternal salvation, no works. But there are deliverances like from alcoholism and so forth that definitely require responsibility and works on our part. Okay, Jephthah. Let's talk about his uniqueness. He was a perfect encouragement for these Hebrews because like them, he was also rejected, these Hebrew believers, because like them, he was also rejected by his brothers as illegitimate. The worthless fellows, remember, that he had joined with, were like the Christians in the Jewish mind of that day of Hebrews that these Hebrews had joined with. They thought the Christians were worthless. But those worthless fellows, like these Christians so despised by many of the Jews at this time, turned out to be not so worthless. They actually saved Israel in the story in Judges. just as Israel would be saved today if they side with Christ and these worthless Christians. Like our Hebrews writer is about to tell us, one of the key verses in the whole book for understanding the book. Therefore, let us go forth to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. There's rejection for following Christ, and Jephthah is the perfect illustration of this truth. David and Samuel, one of the distinctives about David and Samuel is not their reluctance, but the opposite, their readiness to respond. David quickly volunteered, even though his brothers also rejected him and made fun of him. But unlike them, what did he do? He ran to meet Goliath. He ran. Same with Samuel. When he was a little boy, he heard his name called, immediately ran and said to Eli, here I am, here I am. Eli says, no, it wasn't me. Second time, he comes running. Here I am, here I am. They're perfect examples both of obeying the clarion call of Hebrews 4. Today, he says, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. The children of Israel in the wilderness hesitated, and guess what? They missed out on their inheritance. Gordon Livingston wrote a book. I don't know anything about him, really, but the book is The Thing You Think You Cannot Do, 30 Truths About Fear and Courage. He feels the word hero is overused. A true hero, he says, involves things like courage, choosing the difficult course, taking risk, and self-sacrifice. These fellows today that we've been reading about are heroes, not because they're victorious. They're heroes to the Lord because of their responses and efforts that came from faith. That's going to dovetail into next time. Next time, Lord willing, we'll begin a study of some heroes who weren't victorious, at least not on the surface or in the world's eyes. They end up dying, getting cut in two and all that. But because of their faith, they were victors just as much. And if we'll live by faith like these guys, we'll be victors too, overcomers and medicoi. Comments, questions, things to add? Yes.
Did the people that Jesus lived with know that he was not Joseph's son
That he lived with, you mean like in the community or something? I think so. I think a lot of them knew
I've
that.
heard that, but I don't remember ever reading.
Yeah, because definitely the Jewish rulers are saying stuff to the effect that he's a bastard or something. Yeah.
Right.
So if they knew, you assume that the others knew.
So that had to be pretty hard, so.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it amazing how the stuff Jesus went through, almost anybody in any, say you've had child abuse. I mean, you were abused as a child. You know, who can identify with that? Jesus, not that he was abused as a child, but he knows what the abuse is like. He's experienced it to the full. Any kind of terrible thing we've been through, he can identify. Being low esteemed by others, that hurts most of us a lot. Well, he knows that exactly. I mean, Isaiah 53 is such a picture. Yes, Joe.
Okay, volunteers in the day of your power.
Yeah.
So at the Bama,
Well, maybe this is after the Bema, because in the day of his power, and Psalm 110 is quoted as being, it seems to be equal to the enthronement day in Hebrews.
Okay, so volunteers in that day, is it hearkening back to the day that they were volunteers is the reason?
Here's what,
I'm saying?
I mean, why can it be like this? At the Bema, but definitely on the enthronement day with the Medicoi. One of the biggest rewards you can possibly get is to have the title volunteer. Like, you know, you were a volunteer on earth. And what if that were his new name that he gives? You know, maybe each of us get that new name if we were volunteers, but some of us won't get it if we weren't. But how great would it be to be known that you were a volunteer when you realize in heaven that Christ values the volunteer spirit as high as almost any quality we could possibly have of service, servanthood, humility, etc.
He values that higher than anything?
Oh, I don't know about anything. I think he super values it, and I love it that we see it in passages that you'd have to search out, like Psalm 110, Judges 5. When you have the Medicoi lenses on, you look for these things and you realize, ooh, that must be important. But not everybody gets that. It's an example to me of John 14:21. He who has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me, and I will, my Father and I will love him, and I will show myself to him. Hodges thought that especially meant give us insight into the Scriptures and see Him in the Scriptures more. And so, to me, I love it because I know it's a super high value, but it might not be spoken of a lot in the New Testament. But a medicoi would be one he sees these things, and in his reverence and godly fear, he's going to realize, ooh, Jesus likes this. I better like it too.
So, Mike, I guess it's next week. You can be a failure, knowing what's coming later as a overcomer, partaker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't
Okay.
matter how much
Yeah.
you fail.
Let's say you went through seminary and you had all this training, but you never, not your fault necessarily, but you didn't get the opportunity or whatever to have some big ministry, fancy ministry, and so you're just working with five-year-olds upstairs, and that's kind of your ministry, one of your main ministries, and you think so little of yourself. But if you were faithful with what you had, that's the important thing. And like Billy Graham would be quick to say, that the janitor down at the high school who was faithful is going to be more rewarded than I am.
Like Zane would say, the washerwoman.
Exactly.
That was his.
Yeah. Because the issue is being faithful wherever we are, and that might mean we don't have a gigantic ministry, but we were faithful plugging into our kids and grandkids and other things, that the Lord gave us opportunity. That's really the issue. Yeah.
Neighbors or work, your work people or any of that. So anybody can.
In the volunteer spirit, I remember in seminary I was so tired because you had so much work and all that. And I remember Swindoll saying he was famous on the radio at the time, you've got to be able to say no to things. That was such a relief. But what I'm saying today is the balance to that. I want to encourage y'all to be saying yes to things, what you can, and have the cultivate a volunteer spirit when you can, because it's going to be rewarded. Not to make anybody feel guilty. I'm great at doing that. I don't want to do that.
To me, Samson's an interesting character. Because he was a medicoi, but just the way he lived and the example that they show, was he in fellowship with God all during that time? Or was he out of fellowship? The Holy Spirit still worked in him.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really interesting person to study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure is. And I guess you can harden your heart to a point where at some point the Lord departs with his power or blessing or something. But he didn't for so much. I mean, the Lord not only puts up with him, but seems to bless him.
Doesn't he keep asking though?
Yeah, I guess there's some of that in there. I need to reread the story, throughout. But I mean, he goes to prostitutes and stuff, for heaven's sake. I mean, he's not what we think of as medicoi caliber.
But he's an example of someone who finished strong.
Yeah, and speaking of being out of fellowship, he doesn't even know that the Lord's departed from him.
Right.
Yeah, so that's pretty callous.
Yeah. So.
Still got the chest pumped out a little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wish y'all could have met George Grogan. What a wonderful guy. So I told you how he could soothe people. He had this beautiful, not a singing voice, but talking voice. It was just smooth like good whiskey, if you're a whiskey drinker, I guess. It was just good. And then he had an aneurysm that they needed to operate on. And back then there was only one person in the U.S. that did this particular surgery. It was down in Houston. And when they took the aneurysm out, however they did it, they hit his vocal cords. And for the rest of his life, 10 years on, he don't like this, for the rest of his life. And he was great. He did great with it. But one of his strengths was that just smooth, beautiful voice he had that was so comforting and beautiful. What a guy. Okay, anybody else? Any comments? God bless you. Thanks for coming today then. Do you think I should put on the bottom, not that you even look at them, of these study guides, like not to-do list, but like things you might want to apply? How can I apply this week or something?
Or memory verses, things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Memory verses, study points.
You've never looked at one of these study guides in your life, so you're just, you just say that.
I actually talked with Michael
Uh-huh.
over at the soccer field.
Oh, yeah.
His little girls out there playing.
Yeah.
I said, you know what class that I would love to, it's probably a 1 or 2 time class, and that's it.
Yeah.
Is really how to truly study the Bible. I think a lot
Oh,
of people
oh, yeah.
read it, but they don't know how to really study the Bible.
That'd be a good class.
So,
Yeah.
so there's a survey coming out in a couple weeks. That we're working on.
Well, they should do that. That'd be good. Okay, God bless everybody. Have a good week.